Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to really pull apart the key ideas from information you need to know.
That's the plan.
And today we are plunging into, well, a really fascinating interview with Tony Seba.
Mm-hmm. The Rethink X guy.
Exactly. Award-winning author, educator, co-founder of Rethink X and Stellar. And, this guy has a serious track record for spotting big shifts early.
Oh, definitely. You look back, what was it, '06? He's talking Apple, Google, Netflix.
Salesforce, too. Then 2010, he's already calling the trillion-dollar solar industry.
Which happened. And then 2014, again, nailing the boom in solar, batteries, and EVs.
Right, so his credibility is pretty solid. Now, this interview, it also features CERN Basher Robotics energy expert.
Regular contributor on that show, yeah.
So our mission, really, for this deep dive is to get our heads around the core argument in Seba's new book, Stellar. He wrote it with James Arbib.
A World Beyond Limits and How to Get There. It's quite the title.
It is, and we want to explore this vision he has of superabundance. That's the term he uses.
Powered by stellar technologies. We need to unpack what that actually means.
Yeah, and what it could mean for all of us, for you listening. The interviewer actually kicks things off with a key distinction.
Right, the fire analogy.
Exactly. Old tech, like fire, it always needs fuel, right? Constant input. But these stellar technologies...
They're supposed to become self-sustaining.
Okay.
Like the sun, basically. Minimal inputs once they're up and running.
Okay, so quite a different paradigm. Let's get into it.
Well, the foundation Seba builds it's really based on his work over, 2 decades?
Yeah, 20 years he mentions.
And especially the last 9, working with James Arbib. They were focused on 2 big things. Understanding tech disruption, its systemic effects.
Okay.
And also figuring out how to solve the world's, really deep-rooted problems. From the source.
And the big reveal, their kind of eureka moment, was...
that the answers to both are actually the same.
Right, which is kind of profound when you think about it.
It is. And they got there by looking way back, historically.
He mentions Sumeria, 5,000 years ago. And his point is, our basic systems, socioeconomic, political, haven't changed that much.
Still centralized governments, still inequality, environmental issues, conflict.
Yeah, all the familiar stuff. But at the same time, obviously, we've made incredible progress in science, tech, quality of life in many ways.
It's a paradox, isn't it?
Yeah.
How can both be true? That's what they're digging into.
So how does he explain this?
He brings in this concept of extraction. Basically, for thousands of years, humanity's operated in a system where, people and the planet are just inputs.
Inputs into a production machine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The stuff we want, goods, services. But this process also creates, toxic outputs.
Toxic outputs, like...
Inequality, he lists conflict, forced labor, definitely environmental damage. The usual suspects in economics are land, labor, and capital. They're the inputs in this extractive view.
Okay, so that's a framework, extraction. But here's where it gets quite critical.
Yeah, he argues extraction is fundamentally high entropy.
High entropy, meaning it tends towards disorder, like that messy room analogy you mentioned earlier.
Sort of, yeah. It degrades the system over time. It's self-destructive, he argues, because it's driven by this relentless growth imperative.
The need to constantly expand or else...
Things decline, yeah. You need growth just to stand still almost. And he points to history, civilizations collapsing because they hit resource limits, leading to wars, needing standing armies.
Right. All driven by that need to extract more.
And he sees now as the end game of extraction. The problems are global, the potential consequences also global, maybe even collapse.
Wow, that's a pretty heavy picture.
It is. But it's the setup for the alternative he presents.
Okay, so this is where stellar technologies come in, the counterpoint.
Precisely. He says these are fundamentally different. Think solar, wind, batteries.
Okay, the energy ones we know.
But also AI, humanoid robots, precision fermentation in food.
Right. And the key differences.
No continuous extractive flows needed, ideally. No toxic outputs in the same way. And crucially, once they're built, they're largely self-sustaining.
So he uses the car analogy, right? Cars replacing horses. That was huge disruption.
Massive, but still extractive.
Still needed gasoline, oil, steel, produced emissions, still part of that flow system.
Exactly. Whereas stellar energy, solar, wind, batteries, he sees that as a different order of system, higher order.
And he uses the Amazon Web Services example to explain that.
Yeah, it's quite clever. Amazon built way more server capacity than they needed most of the year, just for the Christmas peak.
Okay.
Then they realized, hey, we've got all this spare capacity. Let's rent it out. Boom, AWS.
Right. Okay, I see the connection.
So apply that to stellar energy. You build enough solar, wind, and battery capacity to get through the absolute worst-case scenario, like the darkest, coldest, least windy week in winter.
You build for the trough, not the peak.
Exactly. And once you've done that,
Yeah.
for the rest of the year, you're generating way, way more energy than you actually need based on current demand.
And that excess energy, that's the key.
That's what he calls superpower. Maybe 3 to 5 times more kilowatt hours annually than our current whole system produces.
3 to 5 times.
Yeah. And crucially, the marginal cost of that extra energy is near zero. The sun and wind are free inputs, essentially.
So overbuild for the worst case, and you unlock this massive abundance of nearly free energy.
That's the core insight. It flips the energy equation.
And this superpower then leads to radiance, was the term.
Radiance, yeah. Because you have so much cheap, clean energy, you can use it for other things, like maintaining and upgrading the stellar systems themselves, self-sufficiency, and even environmental restoration, cleaning things up, because it's potentially a negative entropy system.
Giving back instead of just taking a regenerative engine, not a destructive one.
That's the potential he outlines.
Okay, so that's the big picture. How does this play out in specific areas, like transportation?
Right, he gets practical. For transport, he sees a big shift away from owning your own gasoline car. Autonomous, electric, on-demand vehicles, robo-taxis, basically.
Okay, we hear a lot about those. What's the stellar angle?
Well, the economics, first off. He suggests these things could last 500,000, maybe 1 million miles.
Compared to like 140,000 for my car?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
So potentially 10 to 20 times cheaper per mile for you to use.
10 to 20 times cheaper. Wow.
Plus, because they're used constantly, not sitting parked 95% of the time.
We'd need far fewer of them.
Maybe only 20–25% of the current fleet. Think of all the land freed up from parking.
Huge amounts. And no emissions, fewer accidents. The toxic outputs go away.
Exactly. He even mentions battery recycling getting better, maybe old batteries becoming more valuable sources of metals. It fits the non-extractive model.
Okay, so transportation looks radically different. What about food?
Precision fermentation and cellular agriculture.
Precision fermentation. Sounds technical.
It's using microbes, yeast, bacteria, fungi as little factories to produce specific molecules. Proteins, fats.
Like brewing beer, almost.
Kind of, yeah, but precisely targeted. He points out we already use it for rennet in cheesemaking.
Oh, right. Okay.
And he gives the example of brazine, a sweet protein. 1 pound of that stuff is as sweet as maybe 2,000 to 5,000 pounds of sugar.
Whoa. So like truly sugar-free chocolate that tastes good.
That kind of possibility opens up, but the bigger impact is land use.
How so?
He estimates these methods could let us produce the proteins and fats we need using maybe only 10–20% of the land currently used for livestock.
So we could reclaim 80–90% of that land.
An area, he says, equivalent to the U.S., China, and Australia combined. Huge potential for rewilding, restoration.
Just staggering numbers. And again, he thinks like economics will drive this.
Absolutely. Cheaper, better products, less environmental impact.
Okay. Transport, food. What's next? Labor.
Artificial labor, he calls it, the combination of AI and humanoid robots.
Right. AI is obviously moving fast.
He says it's improving on a double exponential basis.
Double exponential? What does that mean, practically?
It means the rate of improvement is accelerating. Not just getting twice as good each year, but the speed at which it gets better is doubling too. It leads to incredibly fast progress.
Hard to even grasp.
Some estimates he mentions are like 9 times to maybe even 900 times improvement per year, combining hardware and software gains.
900 times.
It's mind-boggling. And he talks about an ignition point.
Ignition point.
Where AI can basically improve itself without much human help. Self-sustaining improvement. He thinks maybe within 10 years. Eric Schmidt apparently said 6.
Wow. Okay. And the robots?
Humanoid robots also improving double exponentially. He throws out figures like costing maybe $1 an hour, perhaps even 10 cents an hour. By 2040.
10 cents an hour for a humanoid robot?
That's the projection. And then imagine robots, building more robots, building the factories, another exponential layer.
So this isn't about replacing human workers with machines in the current system.
His view is more radical. It's about moving away from humans being the exploited labor input in the first place. It opens up, well, a totally new space for human activity. What that looks like is hard to say.
Fundamental shift.
Yeah. And this combination, stellar energy plus this artificial labor, that's what he calls the stellar core.
The stellar core,
and that core becomes the foundation for everything else. medicine, transport, food, making materials.
Mhm.
It's the new platform.
So if this stellar core actually happens, the ripple effects through society must be enormous, right?
Yeah.
Governance, economic.
Exactly. This isn't just about cool tech. It's a societal transformation on the scale of, say, the agricultural
He
revolution.
compares it to the Sumerian revolution, moving from hunter-gatherers.
Right. But he says this will happen much, much faster, like 10 to 30 years maybe.
That fast. That's incredibly disruptive, which raises huge questions for you listening. What happens to systems like democracy, like capitalism, in a world where the fundamental problem isn't scarcity anymore?
It's a core question. And people worry, about AI using tons of energy.
Yeah, you hear that a lot.
But Seba argues stellar energy doesn't have that built-in growth imperative of extraction. The focus shifts from generating energy to using the superabundance wisely. Plus, future AI will likely be way more efficient.
Okay.
He even brings up the Fermi paradox. Why haven't we met aliens?
And stellar is an answer.
Potentially. Extractive civilizations need to expand, roam for resources. Stellar ones, being self-sufficient and able to restore their own planet, might just stay home.
Interesting thought. And he also touches on human reproduction.
Yeah, if society no longer needs endless population growth for labor and consumption.
Then maybe individual choices about family size change drastically. Less economic pressure.
Could be, yeah.
Yeah.
More diversity in choices.
Okay, but getting from here, our current world, to that stellar future, that sounds like the really tricky part.
Oh, absolutely. He calls it the thorny transition
Hmm.
because these systems, extractive flow-based and stellar stock-based, are fundamentally incompatible in many ways.
We're living in both at once right now. The dual economy.
That's his term for it, yeah.
Yeah.
The old system is declining, the new one is emerging, but they operate on different logic. You need different ways to even measure them.
And he warns about hallucinations. What are those?
Trying to force-fit stellar tech into the old extractive mindset. Things like, he suggests, maybe hydrogen made from fossil fuels, or biofuels competing with food land. Solutions that still rely on problematic flows.
Trying to patch the old system instead of building the new one.
Something like that. And different stellar techs will hit their ignition points at different times. AI might be first.
So it's messy. What drives the shift then?
Economics, ultimately. He believes the stellar options will just become overwhelmingly cheaper and better.
But what about people caught in the middle? Jobs disappearing in the old system.
That's crucial. He talks about needing cushions. Universal basic income, UBI, might be a temporary measure during the dual economy.
This tempo.
Yeah, his longer-term idea is something he calls stellar output rights. As the stellar system creates abundance, maybe people get rights to a share of that output directly.
Instead of income to buy scarce goods. Interesting.
But here's a really provocative prediction he makes. Potential collapse of the monetary system itself.
Collapse of money. How?
Well, think about money's main role. Allocating scarce resources, especially land and labor. If energy becomes super abundant and labor is done by AI and robots.
Then the primary things money manages become not scarce.
Exactly. Land can be reclaimed, energy is near free, labor is artificial. What does money do then? Fundamentally, its core purpose might evaporate.
That's a radical thought. So what happens to our economies?
It raises huge questions. And it's why he stresses building the stellar energy infrastructure before any potential monetary breakdown. You need the physical abundance layer first.
Got it. The foundation.
And he argues strongly that the stellar core AI, artificial labor, energy, needs to be open source, unowned, like the internet protocols or the highway system.
To prevent massive inequality. One company owning the AI that runs everything.
Pretty much. He suggests maybe a patent-like system, but where the tech becomes public domain after, say, 10, 20 years, ensure broad access to the abundance.
What about countries drowning in debt now if money changes or we get deflation?
Yeah, that's a huge challenge. Deflation makes existing debt heavier. Governments currently like inflation to manage debt.
So they'll keep printing money.
Likely, he suggests, which could mean fiat currencies lose value rapidly. Maybe scarce assets, like Bitcoin he mentions, could fill a void as a store of value, but that's speculative.
And governance, how does that change?
Extractive systems, needing growth and resource control, tended towards centralization, hierarchies, armies, kings, corporations.
Makes sense.
Stellar systems, being inherently distributed, scalable, and without that same growth pressure. Then we might favor more networked, collaborative, open-source ways of organizing, less top-down control.
A different structure for a different kind of society.
But getting there requires more than just tech. He emphasizes needing a stellar mindset.
A stellar mindset, meaning
Shifting from competition over scarcity to collaboration and abundance, thinking more about community, shared benefit. That cultural shift is key for a smooth transition.
so it's a technological shift, an economic shift, and a mindset shift, all happening incredibly fast.
That's the picture Seba paints. Profound, rapid transformation from extraction and scarcity to superabundance and restoration.
A fundamentally different kind of world, potentially beyond our current ideas of economics and politics.
Which brings us to the final thought for you, the listener. What parts of how you see the world now, your own beliefs, our society's structures, what might be totally upended by true superabundance?
And maybe more importantly, how do our own mindsets, our own ways of thinking need to evolve if we want to navigate and thrive in that kind of stellar future?
Yeah, it's a lot to chew on. Seba's work, Rethink X, the book Stellar, definitely worth exploring further if this sparks your interest.
Absolutely. A really mind-bending deep dive today. Thanks for exploring these ideas with us.